It was a warm afternoon in London, and the air outside Buckingham Palace buzzed with excitement. Tourists from different countries stood behind the tall black iron gates, cameras raised, waiting to see the royal guards in their red coats and tall black hats. They stood so still that people often whispered and wondered if they were real. The sound of distant horse hooves, footsteps, and camera clicks filled the street, giving the place a calm but proud feeling. Among the crowd was a young man named Ryan. He was in his 20s, wearing a leather jacket with patches, jeans, and black boots. He had arrived on a loud motorbike, the kind that made people turn their heads. The deep growl of the engine broke through the calm air as he parked close to the viewing area. His friends followed behind him on 2 more bikes. They were laughing, talking loudly, and playing music from a speaker tied to one of the bikes. Ryan loved attention. He liked being the center of every moment, especially when a camera was pointed in his direction. He leaned against his bike, chewing gum, and looked at the royal guards standing motionless in the heat. His friend Jake nudged him and said with a grin, "Bet you can't make that guy move." Ryan chuckled and tilted his sunglasses down. "You think he's even human?" "He's like a statue," he replied. The group laughed. One of them took out his phone, already recording. "Go on, mate, give us a show," another one said. Ryan looked around. The tourists were watching the guards with quiet respect, some even whispering as if they were in a church. The seriousness of it made Ryan's grin widen. He liked doing things that broke rules, not to hurt anyone, but to feel alive and noticed. He pulled off his gloves, tossed them on the seat, and looked down at the silver chain hanging from the side of his bike. It wasn't a weapon, just something he used to lock the bike when he parked it. But when the sunlight hit it, it gleamed like polished metal. An idea flashed in his mind. Just a quick show, something funny for his friends. He picked up the chain and gave it a light swing, letting it clink in the air. The sound was sharp enough to draw a few stares from people nearby. He grinned wider, pretending to spin it like a cowboy lasso, but his eyes stayed on the guard. The tourists began to step back a little, unsure if they should laugh or worry. Phones started to rise higher, recording every move. Ryan took a few slow steps toward the fence. "Hey, soldier," he called in a teasing tone. The guard didn't move an inch. The man's face was straight, his eyes fixed forward, his boots perfectly lined up with the stone beneath him. Ryan tilted his head, impressed and slightly annoyed. "He doesn't even blink," he muttered, taking another step closer. A mother holding a child whispered, "Please stop." But Ryan didn't hear her. He was caught up in the attention, in the way people were now watching him instead of the guards. His friends laughed and shouted from behind, "Come on, Rye. Make him flinch!" Ryan laughed too, spinning the chain once more. The metallic sound rang again, bouncing off the palace walls. The royal guard remained frozen, not even a hint of reaction. His expression stayed calm, his posture perfect. To him, Ryan was just another distraction, one of many he had faced in his career. His duty was to stand guard, protect, and remain silent. Ryan didn't know that. He only saw it as a challenge. As Ryan moved a little closer, one of his friends called out, "You're going to be famous after this." That made him smile again. He swung the chain lightly in front of him, never intending to harm anyone, just to act brave for a few seconds. But the air had changed. The laughter that filled the space a moment ago faded into whispers. Tourists looked uncomfortable. Some began pulling their children back. A few older men shook their heads, sensing it was about to go wrong. The sound of boots on pavement came from the left side, slow, firm, and rhythmic. Palace security officers were already walking toward the scene, their eyes locked on Ryan. The tourists noticed them first, whispering softly, "They're coming." Ryan, lost in his moment, didn't hear. He was too busy trying to make the unshakable soldier move. The crowd had grown quiet, phones still pointed toward him. The loudest sound now was the clicking of cameras and the gentle rattling of the chain in his hand. Ryan's grin slowly weakened when he realized the laughter had stopped. He looked around. Everyone was watching him, not with amusement but with disapproval. His confidence wavered for a second. He swallowed and looked back at the guard. The man stood perfectly still, a symbol of calm power and focus. Ryan suddenly felt a strange feeling. Not fear, but respect. For the first time, he noticed the discipline in the man's stance, the weight of his uniform, and the history behind that quiet silence. A tourist near him whispered, "Don't push it, mate," but Ryan pretended not to hear. He took a slow breath, the chain still in his hand, and tried one last swing in the air. It made a loud metallic swoosh, echoing in the open courtyard. The sound startled a few birds that flew across the sky. The guard didn't move, but another one, a few steps away, turned his head ever so slightly. A silent warning. Ryan froze. That tiny motion felt heavier than a shout. His grin disappeared for the first time. He looked at the guard's calm face and felt something strange in his chest, like a rush of guilt and realization. He didn't know what was coming next, but he sensed that he had crossed a line without meaning to. One of the palace officers was now only a few steps away. Ryan turned his head slightly and saw them coming. His stomach tightened. He quickly lowered the chain and mumbled, all right, I was just kidding." But no one laughed. His friend stopped recording and looked down. The crowd stayed quiet. The officer's calm but firm tone broke the silence. "Sir, step back from the guard," he said. The sound of authority in his voice made Ryan's heart skip. He dropped the chain completely, the clinking sound echoing louder than before. The tourists watching didn't clap, didn't cheer. They just watched in stillness. Ryan stepped back slowly, his eyes now lowered. He felt heat rising to his face, not from anger, but from embarrassment. He realized this wasn't funny anymore. He had become the fool in his own act. He looked at the guard once more. The soldier hadn't moved at all, not even glanced at him. That silence was heavier than words. Ryan turned toward his bike, his hands trembling slightly. He wanted to leave, but the officers were already near him. The crowd parted to make way, and phones stayed lifted, recording every second. Ryan's once confident steps had turned slow and uncertain. He didn't know what would happen next. But deep down, he already knew he had gone too far for attention. The metal chain lay on the ground beside him, shining in the sunlight like a reminder of his mistake. The laughter that had started this moment was gone, replaced by quiet lessons only he could feel. The royal guard stood still, his duty untouched. His silence saying more than any words could ever express. And in that silent moment, Ryan finally understood that respect wasn't about being noticed. It was about knowing when not to cross a line that others protect with honor. The air around the palace grew quiet after Ryan dropped the metal chain. It hit the ground with a soft metallic sound and rolled slightly before stopping near his boot. The laughter that had filled the space only minutes before had turned into silence. Even the sound of the motorbikes felt out of place now. The tourists standing nearby did not move. Some held their phones high. Others just watched, not sure if what they were seeing was trouble or just a foolish show. The royal guard stood like a statue. His tall black bearskin hat glimmered under the afternoon sun, his red coat neat and his rifle steady by his side. Not a single muscle in his face moved. His focus stayed straight ahead as if Ryan did not even exist. That calm strength made Ryan uneasy. It wasn't the silence of fear or anger. It was the silence of someone with control. Ryan looked at the guard for a few seconds, then at the crowd. He tried to bring back his smile, but it didn't feel the same. His friends who had been cheering him a short while ago were now quiet too. They looked at him with awkward faces, pretending to check their phones. None of them wanted to speak first. The fun had vanished. Behind the line of tourists, 2 palace security officers were already walking closer. Their steps were calm but firm, the kind of steps that meant they knew exactly what they were doing. Their dark uniforms and radio earpieces made them look official and serious. A few people in the crowd whispered, "They're coming," while others stepped back to make space. Ryan saw them out of the corner of his eye and felt a cold wave in his chest. He wanted to say something, maybe a joke, but his throat felt dry. The chain that had once felt like a cool prop now looked childish lying near his feet. He tried to act casual, brushing dust off his jacket, but his hands shook slightly. The guard closest to him still didn't move. His boot stayed rooted to the stone path, his shoulders straight, his rifle held perfectly. The sunlight made his brass buttons shine. His expression was serious but calm, the kind that told everyone he was trained to face anything without showing emotion. Ryan felt small standing near him. He looked around again. The tourists weren't smiling. One man with a camera slowly lowered it, his face showing quiet disappointment. A small boy whispered to his mother, "Why isn't the guard moving?" The woman replied softly, "Because he's not supposed to. He's doing his duty." Those words hit Ryan harder than he expected. The minutes stretched long. The 2 security officers reached the front gate. One of them, a tall man with a calm face, spoke in a clear voice. "Sir, please step back from the guard." The firmness in his tone made Ryan flinch. He didn't shout, didn't threaten, but his voice carried command. Ryan stepped back slowly, nodding without saying a word. The crowd exhaled softly like they had been holding their breath. The sound of the wind returned, mixing with the distant rumble of the city. For the first time that day, Ryan realized just how serious the place was. It wasn't a stage or a showground. It was a symbol of respect and discipline. The guard finally made a small motion. He adjusted his position by half a step, lifted his rifle slightly, and called out in a loud, controlled tone, "Make way for the king's guard." The words echoed off the palace walls like thunder. Every sound around stopped. The tourists stepped back instantly, creating a path. Ryan stood frozen, his heart racing. The command wasn't angry. It was strong and trained. It reminded everyone who was in charge. Ryan felt the power of that single moment. The guard didn't need to threaten or argue. His voice alone carried years of duty and pride. The seriousness in it made Ryan's hands tremble slightly. He stepped back farther, his eyes still locked on the guard. His mind played back what had just happened, the laughter, the noise, the chain. It all seemed foolish now. He didn't even know why he had done it. He just wanted a reaction, something funny for a video. But now he realized it wasn't a joke anymore. It was a mistake that showed his lack of respect. The security officer reached him and stopped a few feet away. "Sir, you need to move back behind the barrier," the officer said quietly. Ryan nodded quickly and obeyed. His boots felt heavy as he walked backward, each step making his embarrassment grow. The crowd's eyes followed him. Some people whispered to each other, some shook their heads, and others simply watched in silence. When Ryan reached his motorbike, he didn't look at anyone. His friends stood nearby, avoiding eye contact. One of them tried to speak but stopped halfway, unsure what to say. Ryan bent down and picked up the chain, wrapping it slowly around his hand. It no longer looked like something cool to show off. It looked like a reminder of his mistake. The security officers stayed close for a few minutes, making sure the situation was calm. One of them talked quietly into his radio, describing the event in short words. Another officer walked along the fence, checking that no one else was too close. The tourists went back to watching the guards, but the energy had changed. Everyone was quieter now, more respectful. Ryan leaned against his bike, staring at the palace gates. The sound of marching boots came from the distance as a new set of guards approached to take their positions. Their movements were perfect. Every step in rhythm, every turn sharp and practiced. The sight made Ryan realize what real discipline looked like. He had tried to show confidence, but the guards had shown control. There was a difference between being loud and being strong. He watched as the guards swapped places with precision, their boots clicking on the stone. The crowd applauded softly when the ceremony ended. The royal guard he had tried to taunt earlier went back into formation, silent and steady as ever. Ryan admired him now. He didn't know the guard's name or face, but he respected him. One of Ryan's friends finally spoke. "Man, that could have gone bad," he said softly. Ryan nodded but didn't answer. He just looked down at his hands. He thought about what might have happened if he had pushed a little more. He thought about how that one moment could have defined him online forever, not as someone brave, but as someone foolish. The tourists started to leave, their conversations soft and calm. A few still whispered about the biker who messed with the guard, but most moved on. Ryan stayed for a while longer, his bike engine quiet, his mind spinning with thoughts. The sound of the guards' boots, the authority in their voice, and the silence that followed still echoed in his ears. Before leaving, he looked once more at the guard through the iron bars. The man didn't look back, he didn't have to. His stillness said everything. Ryan whispered to himself. He didn't even need to say a word. Then he started his bike quietly this time. No revving, no noise, and slowly drove away. As he turned onto the main road, the palace disappeared behind him, but the memory stayed. He didn't know it yet, but that small moment in front of the palace would change how he saw respect and pride forever. That night, when he got home, he couldn't sleep. The image of the guard standing still replayed in his head again and again. He thought about how calm the man had been, even when he himself was being foolish. He realized strength wasn't in showing power, it was in staying calm when others tested you. He didn't post the video. He deleted it before it could spread. For the first time in a long while, Ryan felt quiet inside. He had come to the palace to make noise, but it was the silence of the guard that spoke the loudest to him. Ryan stood beside his motorbike, still feeling the heat of the moment from before. The crowd was beginning to move on, but his heart hadn't slowed down. He could still hear the sound of the chain hitting the ground, the officer's voice telling him to step back, and the echo of the guard's command, "Make way for the King's Guard." It replayed in his head like a drumbeat. That one sentence carried so much power it felt like the ground itself had spoken. He hadn't expected that. He had thought the guards were just silent figures for tourists, not real soldiers trained to stand firm under any pressure. But now he knew better. His friends stood near their bikes, quiet. The fun they had imagined had completely disappeared. None of them were laughing or joking now. One of them took off his helmet and said softly, "Let's go, man. It's over." Ryan nodded but didn't move. His eyes stayed fixed on the guard who still stood tall at his post, perfectly still, unfazed by everything that had just happened. The tension in the air was heavy, but calm. The security officers who had stepped in were now talking quietly near the fence. They weren't angry or loud. They were just doing their job, making sure everything remained peaceful. Ryan could feel a strange kind of respect growing inside him, not forced but real. He didn't know the guard's name, didn't know where he was from, but he respected his silence more than he had ever respected any shout or argument. A few tourists who had witnessed the scene were still nearby. One older man wearing a cap walked up slowly, standing at a distance from Ryan. "Son," he said in a calm voice, "these men aren't actors. They're real soldiers. You don't test people like that." Ryan didn't argue. He only nodded, staring at the ground. "I know," he replied softly. "I just didn't think." The man gave a small nod and walked away, leaving Ryan alone with his thoughts. The noise of the city began to return. Cars passing, people talking, and pigeons fluttering overhead. Yet Ryan felt disconnected from all of it. He was still standing in that quiet moment between pride and realization. His chest felt heavy, not from fear but from the weight of understanding something he had never cared to think about before. Then a sharp voice suddenly broke the air again, a command, loud and steady. "Step away from the guard!" It came from behind Ryan, from another soldier approaching the area. The sound made him jump. His hands instinctively went up slightly in front of him. The tourists turned again, their eyes widening. For a brief second, it felt like time stopped. The guard Ryan had been taunting finally moved. His boot struck the stone ground with a deep, firm sound. He took one step forward, lifted his rifle into position with perfect precision, and shouted, "Make way for the King's Guard." His voice wasn't angry. It was controlled, clear, and full of authority. It carried through the open air, bouncing off the palace walls. Everyone nearby froze in place. Ryan's body stiffened. He didn't move a muscle. His heart was pounding so hard that he could hear it in his ears. The guard's face was calm, but his presence filled the space. He didn't point his weapon or make any harsh movement. He simply did what he was trained to do, protect his post with confidence and discipline. Ryan's earlier grin, the one that had looked so sure of itself, completely disappeared. His lips parted slightly, but no words came out. For the first time that day, Ryan felt small. He realized how serious the place really was. The guard wasn't just standing for tourists. He was representing a tradition, a symbol of respect and service. The silence that followed was almost heavier than the shout itself. The tourists stood still. Children held their parents' hands, and the city noise seemed to fade. Ryan's hands were still in front of him, as if frozen. Slowly he lowered them and took a step back. His voice came out shaky. "I didn't mean any harm," he said softly, more to himself than anyone else. But nobody answered him. The moment didn't need words. The guard went back to his position, perfectly still again, as if nothing had ever happened. The officer who had shouted before approached Ryan now. His expression wasn't angry, it was calm but firm. "Sir, you understand how serious this could have been?" he asked. Ryan nodded immediately. "Yes, I do." "I'm sorry," he said. His tone was honest, his earlier confidence completely gone. The officer studied him for a moment and then said, "Good. Then let this be the last time." With that, he stepped aside and signaled to his fellow guards that everything was under control. Ryan stood there for a few seconds, still feeling the echo of the guard's command ringing in his chest. His throat felt dry. He looked around at the tourists. None of them were laughing or recording anymore. Some gave him disapproving looks, while others looked away as if they didn't want to see his embarrassment. His friends avoided his eyes. When he bent down to pick up the chain again, it felt heavier than before. The sound it made against the pavement seemed louder, too. He coiled it up slowly and placed it on the back seat of his bike, careful not to make any noise. Every small sound felt wrong now. He wished he could go back 5 minutes and stop himself before it all started. One of his friends whispered, "Let's just leave, man." But Ryan didn't move right away. He kept looking at the guard. He wondered what it must be like to stand so still while the world moved around you, to have that kind of discipline, that calmness. He felt something close to admiration. The guard's eyes didn't move, his expression didn't change, yet Ryan could feel the strength behind that silence. It wasn't about showing power. It was about having control. That realization hit him harder than any shout ever could. A small boy who had been watching with his parents looked up at the guard and said softly, "He's brave." His mother smiled and nodded. Ryan heard it and it stayed in his mind. Brave wasn't the loud one swinging the chain. Brave was the one who didn't need to move, didn't need to prove anything, and still commanded respect. As the crowd began to shift again, the officer returned to his position near the gate. The guards continued their routine as if nothing had happened, their movements exact and unbroken. It was as though the palace had swallowed the moment and moved on, leaving Ryan standing in its shadow, feeling smaller than ever. He finally climbed onto his motorbike, started the engine quietly, and sat there for a few seconds. He didn't look at the crowd or his friends. He just stared at the handlebars, thinking. The noise of the engine didn't sound proud anymore. It sounded hollow. He turned it off again and took a deep breath. He didn't want to rush away. He wanted to remember what he had just learned. A young tourist who had recorded the whole thing on her phone looked at Ryan as she walked by. "You got lucky," she said softly. "They don't play around here." Ryan nodded without arguing. "I know," he replied. It was the only thing he could say. When he finally rode off down the street, the sound of the palace faded behind him, but the memory of that command, that single sentence, stayed. It wasn't the shout that changed him. It was the calm strength that followed it. He realized then that real respect doesn't come from fear. It comes from knowing when to be humble. That night, when he reached home, Ryan parked his bike and sat on the steps for a long time. The city lights glowed softly around him, but his mind was still back at the palace gates. He thought about the guard's face, calm, focused, unshaken. He imagined standing there for hours in silence while people tried to make him move. That kind of self-control wasn't weakness. It was power. Ryan finally understood something that would stay with him forever. Sometimes silence is louder than noise, and respect is earned not by showing off but by understanding your place in the moment. He had gone there to impress his friends, but he left with something far more valuable. A lesson in humility taught not through words, but through stillness. The noise of the city carried on as if nothing had happened, but Ryan's world had slowed down. He sat quietly on his motorbike, the same one he had proudly arrived on an hour earlier. But now it didn't feel like a symbol of freedom or confidence. It felt heavy beneath him, like a reminder of what he had done. The moment still played in his head. The guard's voice, the chain hitting the ground, and the sudden silence that had followed. The look on people's faces, the quiet disappointment in their eyes all stayed with him. He didn't know how to erase it. The palace guards had returned to their normal routine. Their boots struck the ground in rhythm, their movements so sharp that even the wind seemed to move in time with them. The tourists were calmer now, their voices soft, their phones held low. A few glanced in Ryan's direction, whispering quietly to one another. Some pointed, others just shook their heads. Ryan didn't say anything. He had nothing to defend himself with. 2 police officers arrived near the gate a few minutes later. They walked toward the small crowd, speaking quietly to one of the palace security officers. The officer pointed in Ryan's direction. Ryan's chest tightened when he saw them looking his way. He felt the same cold rush he had felt before, but this time it wasn't from pride. It was from fear of what might happen next. One of the officers, a tall man with kind but serious eyes, approached him. His voice was steady. "Sir, can we have a word?" Ryan nodded right away. Yes, of course, he said. The words came out softer than he expected. The officer asked for his identification, and Ryan quickly pulled out his wallet, handing it over. His hands were shaking, but he tried to stay calm. The officer didn't raise his voice or act angry. He just spoke firmly, asking simple questions: where Ryan was from, why he was there, and what had happened. I didn't mean to cause trouble, Ryan said quietly. It was a stupid mistake. I thought it was just a joke. The officer looked at him carefully, then replied, It may have seemed like a joke to you, but to them it's not. These guards have a duty to protect this place. You can't interfere with that. His tone wasn't harsh, it was factual, and that made Ryan feel worse. A few people nearby were still recording. Ryan noticed one of them, a man with a large camera capturing every second of the conversation. He turned his head slightly to the side, embarrassed. The idea that millions of people could see this later made him feel smaller than ever. The same crowd that had laughed before was now completely silent, watching him like a lesson being taught. The officer gave him a warning and a small fine for public disturbance. It wasn't much, but the weight of it wasn't in the money. It was in the message behind it. He thanked the officer, even though his voice trembled. I understand, Ryan said. It won't happen again. The officer nodded once, returned his ID, and told him he was free to go. Ryan turned toward his bike, but before leaving, he looked back at the guard one more time. The soldier still hadn't moved. He stood tall, rifle by his side, eyes straight ahead, every bit as calm as before. Ryan stared at him for a moment longer, his chest tightening with respect. He wanted to say something, maybe sorry, maybe thank you. But the guard wouldn't hear it, and even if he did, it didn't matter. His duty was to stay silent. Ryan climbed onto his bike. The chain, now wrapped neatly on the seat, glimmered in the sun. He didn't touch it. He started the engine, but this time he didn't rev it. He just sat there for a few seconds, letting the quiet wash over him. Then slowly he drove away, the sound of his motor fading softly down the street instead of roaring like before. That night, Ryan couldn't stop thinking about the incident. He scrolled through his phone, hoping no one had posted anything yet. But his heart sank when he saw a video with the title, Biker Tries to Taunt Royal Guard, Instantly Regrets It. It had already gathered thousands of views. The thumbnail showed him standing near the fence, swinging the chain. The comments were flooding in. Some called him disrespectful, some laughed at him, but most simply said, he learned his lesson. Ryan put the phone down and stared at the ceiling. He felt embarrassed, but beneath that was something deeper. Guilt. Not the kind of guilt that comes from being caught, but the kind that comes from realizing you were wrong. He thought about the guard again, how calm he had been through everything. That kind of self-control wasn't easy. Ryan knew that now. He wished he had that kind of strength, the power to stay calm when provoked, to stay silent when others tried to shake you. The next day, his phone didn't stop buzzing. Friends, classmates, and even people he barely knew were messaging him. Some teased him. Others asked if it was really him in the video. He didn't reply to most of them. He felt too ashamed to talk about it. He didn't want attention anymore. A few days later, a news channel replayed the clip with a short report. The reporter explained how the guards were trained to maintain their composure, and how the man in the video had crossed the line by trying to disturb an officer on duty. Ryan watched the segment quietly. His name wasn't mentioned, but he didn't need to hear it to know they were talking about him. He could see it in the way the crowd looked at the biker in the video, a look of judgment mixed with pity. He didn't go out much for a while. He stayed home thinking about what had happened. His friends tried to laugh it off, saying it wasn't a big deal, but Ryan couldn't forget the feeling of standing there, surrounded by people, realizing that he had disrespected someone who was simply doing his job. Weeks passed, and the video began to fade from social media as news stories took its place. But Ryan still remembered. He didn't see it as humiliation anymore. He saw it as a turning point. The memory of the guard's stillness stayed with him, like a quiet voice in his mind that reminded him to think before acting. One afternoon, while walking through a nearby park, Ryan saw a group of kids teasing a park warden who was cleaning near the benches. They were shouting silly things, laughing, and filming with their phones. For a moment, Ryan saw himself in them. The same careless pride, the same thoughtless excitement. He walked over, gently stopped them, and said, "Hey, don't do that." He's just doing his job. Trust me, you'll regret it later. The kids looked confused but backed away. The warden nodded at him in quiet thanks. Ryan felt a strange peace inside. It was as if that single mistake in front of the palace had taught him something more valuable than any book or advice could. Respect wasn't about fear or authority. It was about understanding that everyone's job, no matter how small or big, deserved dignity. As time went on, Ryan started using his experience to remind others to act with respect. He even posted a short video explaining how that day had changed him. He didn't try to defend his actions or blame anyone, he just told the truth. I went there thinking it would be funny, he said in the video. But what I saw was discipline, strength, and silence. And that silence taught me more than anything else. People who watched it commented positively, calling it a rare and honest confession. Some said it made them think twice about how they treated people in uniform. That made Ryan feel lighter. Months later, he visited London again. He stood far from the palace gates this time, quietly watching the guards as they performed their duties. The same calmness was there, the same respect in the air. He smiled softly, not out of pride but out of gratitude. That moment had once been his biggest embarrassment, but now it was his greatest lesson. The guard who had faced him that day might never know it, but his calm strength had changed someone's life. And for Ryan, that was enough. He had learned that true power doesn't come from noise but from quiet strength and self-control. The kind that stands firm even when the world around you is trying to make you move. Months passed since that afternoon outside Buckingham Palace, but Ryan still remembered every second of it. The sound of the guards' command, the stillness that followed, and the faces in the crowd had stayed in his mind like a quiet echo. What used to be just another day of showing off had become a turning point in his life. He didn't realize it right away, but over time the lesson became clear. Real strength wasn't loud, and respect wasn't a joke. The video of the event had gone around the internet, but by now, it was old news. People had moved on to other things, other moments, other mistakes caught on camera, yet for Ryan, the memory didn't fade. Every time he saw a police officer, a soldier, or anyone in uniform, he felt a different kind of respect. Not fear, but understanding. He would nod quietly, remembering the calm, firm eyes of the royal guard who never said a word to him, yet taught him a lifetime's worth of discipline. He started working again at his small auto repair shop outside London. His co-workers often joked about the video at first, calling him the palace guy, but Ryan didn't mind anymore. Instead of getting angry, he laughed along, then told them how much that moment had changed him. He didn't act proud or defensive. He simply explained what he had learned, and slowly people around him started noticing that he was different now. He no longer looked for attention the way he used to. He stopped revving his motorbike just to draw eyes, and he no longer filmed risky stunts for social media. When someone made fun of a police officer or tried to mock someone in uniform, he was the first to speak up. "You don't know what they go through," he would say. "You don't know how much control it takes to stand there while people try to make you move." One afternoon, Ryan was invited to a local youth center by a friend who worked there. The center often organized talks for teenagers about road safety and respect for public property. Ryan was surprised when his friend said, "You should speak, mate. Tell them your story." At first, he hesitated. He didn't see himself as someone who could give speeches, but then he thought about that day again. The crowd, the silence, the lesson. Maybe if he told the story the right way, it could stop someone else from making the same mistake. He agreed. A week later, he stood in front of about 30 teenagers sitting in folding chairs. Most of them looked half-interested, staring at their phones. Ryan felt nervous at first. His palms were sweaty and he could hear his heartbeat. But once he started speaking, the words came easily. He told them everything. How he went to the palace with his friends. How he thought it would be funny to make a guard move. And how quickly it turned from a joke into something serious. "I learned that day," Ryan said slowly, "that silence can be louder than shouting. That man didn't even look at me, but he made me realize how small I was acting. He had a job to do and I disrespected it. I thought I was being brave, but really I was being foolish." The room was quiet. The kids were listening now. Some of them had probably seen the video online but didn't know it was him. Ryan didn't try to hide it. He even laughed a little at himself. "Yeah, that was me," he said. "The guy with the chain. I thought I was cool. Turns out I just looked lost." When he finished speaking, the youth center leader thanked him and said, "That was honest, That's what they needed to hear. A few of the teenagers even came up to shake his hand. One of them said, "That guard must have been scary." Ryan smiled softly and replied, "No, he wasn't scary. He was calm, and that's what made it powerful." From that day on, Ryan began volunteering at the center whenever he could. He didn't think of himself as a teacher, but he shared his story to remind others that respect isn't something you demand. It's something you give. He talked to young bikers about staying humble and responsible on the road. He spoke to small groups about how pride can blind you in a moment, and how it's never too late to learn from your mistakes. One evening, after one of his talks, he was walking home when he passed by a small shop with a TV in the window, showing a documentary about the Royal Guards. He stopped to watch. The narrator spoke about their discipline, their training, and how they stand for hours no matter the weather, representing centuries of service. Ryan stood there watching quietly, his reflection faintly visible in the glass. When the camera showed the guards outside Buckingham Palace, his eyes softened. He wondered if the same guard was still there, standing firm as always. He wanted to thank him, not for forgiving him, but for unknowingly changing him. A few months later, Ryan finally returned to Buckingham Palace. This time he came alone. He parked his bike far away, not near the gates. He walked quietly to the fence, joining the line of tourists. The air was cool, the sky clear, and the familiar red uniform stood out brightly in the sunlight. The guards were changing shifts. Their boots clicked against the stone, their rifles moved in perfect timing, and the crowd watched in respectful silence. Ryan stood there for a long time, just observing. No phones, no laughter, only quiet respect. The ceremony ended and the new guards took their places. Ryan's eyes searched among them, wondering if the same man was there, but he couldn't tell. They all looked alike in their perfect posture and calm faces. Still, it didn't matter. Every one of them stood for the same thing: discipline, duty, and dignity. As Ryan turned to leave, he noticed a young man nearby acting up, trying to make his friends laugh by shouting silly things toward the guard. The crowd frowned. Ryan took a step closer, gently tapped the young man's shoulder, and said in a calm voice, "Don't, trust me. It's not worth it." The young man looked at him surprised, then saw the sincerity in Ryan's eyes and stepped back without saying anything. Ryan gave a small nod and walked away. He didn't need to explain. He had once been that person. Now he was someone else. Someone who understood that some moments deserve silence, not noise. Later that evening, as the city lights shimmered across the river, Ryan sat on a bench near the Thames. The sound of the water mixed with the distant hum of traffic. He thought about how much he had changed since that day. Life was still the same in many ways: work, friends, ordinary days, but he carried a quiet sense of peace inside him now. He realized that the guard's silence hadn't just stopped him that day, it had guided him since. It had taught him that real confidence doesn't come from showing off. It comes from knowing who you are without needing others to see it. The memory of the chain, the crowd, and the guard's stillness had become more than a story. It had become a reminder of who he never wanted to be again. As the night breeze passed by, Ryan smiled to himself. He whispered softly, "Thank you," even though no one could hear it. He wasn't sure if he was thanking the guard, the lesson, or life itself, maybe all three. Then he stood up, started his motorbike, and rode off slowly into the quiet streets. He didn't need noise anymore to feel alive. From that day onward, whenever someone mentioned Buckingham Palace, Ryan didn't think of his mistake. He thought of the man in the red uniform, standing tall and silent, teaching him through his calm what respect truly meant. And though the world might have forgotten the moment, Ryan never did. It became the story he carried for the rest of his life. The day a soldier's silence turned a careless man into someone who finally understood what honor really is.